There's something about the ocean that feels alive with memory. When you stand at the edge of the waves, listening to their endless rhythm, it's as if they're whispering secrets from a time long forgotten. The water doesn't just move, it carries stories, myths, the echoes of voices that once called across its surface. What if these aren't just tales passed down through generations, but something deeper? What if the ocean itself remembers? Across cultures and centuries, water has been more than a force of nature. It's been a sacred vessel, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of rituals so ancient they feel woven into the very fabric of the tide. From Polynesian navigators who read the stars and waves like maps, to Norse legends where the sea roared with the anger of gods, water has always been more than a setting for myth. It's been a character, a witness, a living archive. Think of the rituals tied to water: ceremonies of birth, death, and rebirth, offerings cast into rivers, prayers whispered over bowls of sacred liquid. These aren't just traditions, they're acts of communion with something far older than humanity. When a sailor pours a libation into the sea to calm a storm, or a village gathers to bless the waters that sustain them, they're not just performing a custom. They're speaking to the ocean's memory, adding their voices to a chorus that stretches back to the dawn of time. Water doesn't forget. It holds the imprint of every hand that's cupped it, every tear that's fallen into it, every chant that's risen above its surface. And in that way, myths aren't just stories, they're echoes, rippling outward through time, carried by currents both literal and symbolic. So what happens when we listen? When we trace these water-borne rituals back to their sources, we uncover more than folklore. We find a map of human longing, fear, and reverence. The ocean doesn't just separate lands, it connects them through shared stories, through rites that transcend borders. In this video, we'll dive into the depths of these mysteries, exploring how cultures around the world have turned water into a keeper of their most sacred truths. We'll see how a single drop can hold an entire cosmology, how a wave can carry the weight of 1,000 prayers. This isn't just about the past, it's about how these rituals still pulse through our lives today, how the ocean's memory might still be speaking to us if only we know how to listen. The water is waiting. Let's begin. Water holds a paradox at the heart of mythology. It is both the beginning and the end, the womb and the grave. In the Babylonian creation epic, the goddess Tiamat isn't just a body of water. She is chaos itself, a primordial sea that births gods and monsters before becoming the raw material of the cosmos when slain. Yet even in her destruction, she gives form to the world, her waters shaping the heavens and earth. This duality echoes across traditions. The Hindu Samudra Manthan, the churning of the cosmic ocean, reveals a similar tension. From its depths emerge both nectar of immortality and deadly poison. The ocean here isn't passive. It's a participant, yielding treasures and terrors in equal measure, as if its depths remember the potential for both creation and unraveling. Consider the Greek titan Oceanus, whose vast river coiled around the world like a serpent. To the ancient Greeks, he wasn't merely a boundary but a living force, his currents threading through the underworld, the mortal realm, and the divine. His waters didn't just separate lands, they connected them, carrying whispers between realms. Similarly, in Yoruba tradition, Olokun rules the abyss, a deity veiled in mystery, associated with both unfathomable wealth and devastating floods. These myths don't just describe water, they animate it, granting it agency, memory, even temperament. What's striking is how often these stories intertwine water with ritual. When Babylonian priests poured offerings into the Euphrates, or Hindu devotees floated lamps down the Ganges, they weren't just honoring deities. They were engaging with water as a collaborator, a medium that could carry prayers into the unseen. The act itself implied belief that water could hold their intentions, preserving them like a vessel. In Japan, Shinto ceremonies purify with water, treating it as a conduit between the human and divine, capable of washing away impurity, not just physically but spiritually. These rituals suggest something profound. If water can destroy, it can also cleanse. If it can drown, it can also baptize. Perhaps this is why so many cultures treat water as a keeper of secrets. The Maori speak of the Mona, the deep ocean, as a repository of ancestral knowledge, its waves singing the stories of those who crossed it. Norse skalds describe the sea as Aegir's Hall, where drowned warriors feasted eternally, their tales preserved in the foam. Even the act of tossing coins into fountains, a seemingly simple modern gesture, carries this ancient thread, the hope that water will remember our wishes and carry them forward. These myths and rituals hint at something beyond metaphor. They suggest that water isn't just a symbol of memory, it might be memory itself, a liquid archive that refuses to forget. When we stand at the shore today, we're not just observers. We're adding to the story, our own ripples joining the countless others that have shaped and been shaped by the ocean's endless recall. The practice of casting offerings into the sea stretches back further than recorded history, a universal language of reverence spoken by civilizations who knew the ocean's power intimately. Phoenician sailors, masters of the ancient Mediterranean, would throw precious jewels or finely crafted figurines overboard during storms, believing the sea demanded tribute for safe passage. To them, the waves weren't just unpredictable, they were sentient, capable of both fury and mercy. Viking sagas tell of warriors sacrificing gold arm rings to Njord, god of the wind and waves before long voyages. The metal would sink into the depths, a gleaming plea carved into the water itself, as if the ocean's memory could be swayed by such gifts. What's fascinating is how these rituals reveal a shared understanding. Water doesn't merely receive, it communicates. In many traditions, the act of offering wasn't just transactional, it was conversational. Polynesian navigators whispered chants as they poured coconut oil onto the waves, a dialogue with the ocean's unseen guardians. The oil would spread across the surface like a shimmering veil, a temporary bridge between human and divine. Even the direction of the currents mattered. Offerings thrown where tides pulled outward were thought to carry petitions to ancestral spirits, while items cast into incoming waves might bring blessings back to shore. Modern customs still echo this ancient logic. Tossing coins into fountains may seem whimsical today, but the underlying impulse remains startlingly similar. We subconsciously treat water as a keeper of wishes, trusting it to hold our hopes in its depths. Scientists even find traces of this belief in unexpected places, like the message in a bottle tradition, where letters sealed in glass are surrendered to the sea's whim, as if the water itself will decide their fate. But here's the deeper question: could these rituals leave more than symbolic marks? Some indigenous cultures speak of water as a living ledger, imprinted by every interaction. The Maori describe certain springs as waitapu, sacred waters that remember the touch of ancestors. In West African diaspora traditions, libations poured for the dead aren't just symbolic, they're nourishment carried by the water's memory to the spirit world. Even the scientific concept of water memory, though controversial, hints at humanity's persistent intuition that water might retain more than we can measure. Perhaps these offerings are more than superstition. They're a recognition that water isn't just a substance, it's a participant in the stories we tell. When a Viking's gold vanished beneath the waves, or a Phoenician's amulet slipped into the abyss, They weren't just bribing the gods, they were weaving their lives into the ocean's endless narrative, trusting the water to remember long after their voices faded. And in that trust, they may have grasped a truth we're still learning to name. Long before mirrors polished to perfection, humans turned to water's shimmering surface as a window to the unseen. Picture a Celtic seer hunched over a bronze bowl at dusk, the last light of day dancing across the water's face. To her, this wasn't just a vessel, it was a threshold. As she whispered incantations, the ripples seemed to rearrange themselves into symbols, faces, fragments of futures not yet woven. This practice, called scrying, appears in cultures worldwide, each interpreting water's reflections as a cipher for hidden knowledge. The Druids believed certain sacred pools could reveal omens when the moon struck them just so, while in parts of West Africa, diviners would interpret the patterns of oil swirling on water's surface, reading the interplay of light and liquid like a celestial script. Haitian Vodou takes this further with the Elo Miroir, the water mirror ritual. A glass of water becomes an altar, a conduit for spirits to communicate. The diviner gazes into its depths, not just at their own reflection, but through it, as if the water holds a parallel world just beneath its skin. What's striking is how these traditions treat water not as a passive reflector, but as an active participant in revelation. The surface doesn't just show, it selects, distorts, unveils. This suggests something profound. If water can conceal depths, perhaps it also chooses what to reveal, guarding some truths while surrendering others. Science offers an eerie parallel in the concept of quantum memory, where water molecules are theorized to retain imprints of what they've encountered. While controversial, it's uncanny how this mirrors the ancient belief that water absorbs knowledge. Medieval Arab scholars wrote of water clocks that could divine a patient's illness by the way droplets beaded on their surface, and Norse lore speaks of the Well of Erd, where the Norns read destinies in its murky waters like a living tome. Even the simple act of skipping stones carries a whisper of this, the fleeting, distorted visions in each splash, as if the water is offering fragmented glimpses into another layer of reality. These rituals all share a silent understanding. Water doesn't just reflect, it remembers. When a Haitian mambo traces visions in a water mirror, or a Celtic seer deciphers ripples, they're tapping into an ancient idea that the ocean's memory isn't just metaphorical. It's a library with liquid pages where every current, every eddy holds stories waiting to be read. And if that's true, then every time we gaze into water, we're not just looking at its surface. We're meeting the gaze of something far older, something that has watched countless others before us lean close, hoping the waves will whisper back. There's a moment in nearly every culture's rites of passage when water becomes more than an element, it becomes a threshold. Imagine a Mesopotamian priest 4,000 years ago, dipping his hands into the Euphrates to wash away impurity before entering the temple. To him, the river wasn't just removing dirt, it was dissolving spiritual weight, carrying it downstream like a burden released. This idea that water can erase and renew echoes through time, surfacing in rituals as diverse as Christian baptisms and Hindu Sankalpa ceremonies. The act itself is simple: immersion, submersion, emergence. But the belief behind it is profound, that water doesn't just clean, it transforms. Take the Christian sacrament of baptism, where plunging into holy water symbolizes death to an old life and rebirth into a new one. Early converts in Rome would strip off their clothes before entering the baptismal font, a literal shedding of the past, and rise gasping, wrapped in white robes as if freshly born. The water here isn't just a tool, it's an agent of metamorphosis, capable of washing away sins not just symbolically but spiritually. Some medieval theologians even described baptismal water as charged with divine energy, as if it absorbed the prayers of generations and stored their power like a living battery. Now cross the world to the banks of the Ganges, where Hindu devotees perform Sankalpa, a ritual where they cup sacred water in their palms, whisper intentions into it, then let it trickle back into the river. The belief isn't that the water simply carries their words away, but that it dissolves them, blending individual desires with the river's ancient flow. Pilgrims leave behind not just physical offerings, flowers, lamps, prayers, but the very essence of their hopes, trusting the water to reconfigure them into something purer. This duality, water as both eraser and archive, raises a haunting question. If rivers and fonts can scrub away sins, where do those sins go? The Babylonian incantation texts hint at an answer. They describe evil spirits trapped in water, swirling in eddies until exorcised by priests. Norse myths speak of the well H. Virgilmere, where serpents gnaw on the roots of the world tree, their venom seeping into the waters as a reminder that purification isn't always gentle. Even modern science offers an eerie parallel, the way water molecules can form temporary structures around impurities, holding them in fragile cages before releasing them downstream. Perhaps this is why so many purification rituals involve movement, flowing rivers, pouring libations, waves crashing on shores. Stagnant water frightens us, it gathers what it collects. But moving water promises renewal, carrying the old away while making space for the new. Yet somewhere, in some unseen depth, the ocean's memory lingers. Every baptized soul, every whispered sankalpa, every offering ever swallowed by the tides, they're not truly gone. They're suspended in the liquid archive. Part of the story water tells itself as it cycles endlessly between earth and sky. Somewhere between ancient ritual and modern laboratory, a provocative question lingers: could water truly remember? In the late 1980s, French immunologist Jacques Benveniste sent shockwaves through the scientific community with his controversial water memory hypothesis. His experiments suggested that water might retain molecular imprints of substances long after they'd been diluted away, like an invisible fingerprint left in liquid. The implications were staggering. If true, it meant water didn't just carry history in myth, but in its very structure. Mainstream science swiftly dismissed his work as flawed, even accusing him of self-deception. Yet the idea refused to dissolve. Like ripples from a cast stone, it spread beyond academia, resonating with those who'd always sensed water was more than H2O. Then came Masaru Emoto, whose disputed experiments with frozen water crystals became a cultural phenomenon. Photographs of ice formations, some beautifully symmetrical, others grotesquely distorted, purported to show how water responded to words, music, even human intention. Label a glass love, and its frozen crystals would gleam like geometric stars. Scroll hate, and they'd collapse into chaos. Critics pointed out glaring flaws in his methodology, but the images struck a chord. Here, it seemed, was visual proof of what shamans and sailors had whispered for millennia, that water listens. What's fascinating isn't whether these theories hold up to scrutiny, but why they captivate us. Science and myth both circle the same mystery: water's uncanny ability to mirror our deepest intuitions. When a laboratory measures hydrogen bonds and a folktale speaks of enchanted springs, they're wrestling with the same riddle from different angles. Modern physics tells us water behaves strangely. Its molecules form fleeting structures, dancing between order and chaos. Indigenous elders describe rivers as living libraries. Coincidence, perhaps, but consider how often folklore anticipates scientific curiosity. The Maori spoke of Wai Maori, ordinary water, becoming Wai Tapu, sacred, through contact with chant. Centuries later, researchers explore how sound frequencies might alter water's molecular arrangement. This isn't about proving who's right. It's about recognizing a pattern humanity's persistent sense that water is more than what we can measure. When a child skips stones, when a mourner tosses flowers into the sea, when a scientist peers into a microscope, we're all reaching toward the same truth. Water doesn't just reflect our world, it interacts with it in ways we're only beginning to fathom. The lab coats and the legends might use different languages, but their questions echo across the same vast, uncharted depths. For the Sama Bajau people of Southeast Asia, the ocean isn't just a place it's kin. Known as sea nomads, they spend lifetimes suspended between waves, their homes built on stilts above the tides. So when death comes, it's only natural they return their loved ones to the water's embrace. The ritual is simple yet profound. The body, wrapped in cloth, is weighted with stones and slipped beneath the surface without ceremony, as if delivering a letter to a familiar hand. There's no fear in this surrender, only trust that the departed will dissolve into the currents, becoming one with the same waters that cradled their first breaths. To the Sama Bajau, the sea isn't a grave. It's a homecoming, a reunion with ancestors who have already blended into the brine. Half a world away, Viking chieftains received a different but equally reverent farewell. Their bodies, dressed for battle, were laid aboard ships piled with treasures, weapons, even sacrificed animals. Then, flames would consume the vessel as it drifted seaward, a blazing bridge to Valhalla. The Norse didn't just consign their dead to the water, they armed them for a journey, trusting the waves to carry their spirits where fire couldn't reach. What's striking is how both cultures, separated by thousands of miles and centuries, saw water not as an end but a passage. The Sama Bajau's quiet descent and the Vikings' fiery send-off share a core belief. The ocean remembers those who have crossed it and will guide them beyond sight. This notion of water as a keeper of the dead appears in countless traditions. Ancient Egyptians buried their dead with miniature boats to navigate the celestial Nile. The Ganges receives ashes with the certainty that its currents will deliver souls to liberation. Even modern naval funerals, where cremains are scattered at sea, echo this primal instinct that water dissolves boundaries between the living and the gone. But why? Perhaps because water embodies the paradox of mortality itself, fluid yet enduring, transient yet eternal. When a body returns to the sea, it doesn't vanish. It transforms, its atoms dispersing to feed plankton, to salt the waves, to rise as rain. In this way, funeral rites honor a deeper truth, that no one truly leaves. They simply become part of the ocean's vast, swirling recollection. There's a chilling beauty to the science behind this. Oceanographers have traced how a single drop of water can circumnavigate the globe in centuries, carrying traces of everything it's touched. In a very literal sense, the sea holds within it every tear ever shed, every libation poured, every body surrendered to its depths. The Sama Bajau and Vikings may not have known the hydrologic cycle, but their rituals reveal an intuitive grasp of water's endless recycling. When they entrusted their dead to the waves, they weren't saying goodbye. They were adding another chapter to the ocean's story, one that would ripple outward long after their own voices faded. Today, as we struggle with the ethics of burial at sea or the scattering of ashes, we're grappling with the same awe our ancestors felt. The rituals have modernized, but the pull remains the sense that water doesn't just take, it keeps. Whether it's a sailor's final request or a family's quiet ceremony at dawn, these acts still whisper the oldest of truths. The sea never forgets, and in its remembering, neither do we. To navigate the vast Pacific, ancient voyagers didn't just read the stars, they sang to the sea. Picture a Polynesian navigator standing at the helm of a double-hulled canoe, his voice rising above the wind as he chants the names of unseen islands. Each syllable is a compass point, each rhythm a wave pattern memorized over generations. These weren't mere songs, they were living maps, intricate oral archives where every verse held the secrets of currents, winds, and the flight paths of birds. The ocean wasn't a void to cross, it was a tapestry of songlines, invisible threads of knowledge woven into chants so precise they could guide sailors across thousands of miles without a single written chart. What's astonishing is how these chants functioned as ecological databases. A single melody might encode the subtle shift in wave patterns that signaled land over the horizon, or the specific constellation that rose when the tuna began their migration. The Kupuna, the elders of Hawaii, still speak of the holy sacred chants that don't just describe the sea but converse with it. When a navigator sang the birth chant of a particular current, they weren't just recalling information, they were awakening a relationship, reminding the ocean of its own rhythms. This wasn't poetry, it was precision science disguised as art, a way of storing terabytes of environmental data in the human voice. Modern oceanographers are now uncovering eerie parallels. Studies in underwater acoustics reveal how sound travels farther and faster in water than in air, with low-frequency waves circling the globe through the Sofar Channel, a natural oceanic waveguide. Could this explain why so many indigenous navigational chants use deep, resonant tones? The Maori traditionally credited the god Tangaroa with embedding knowledge in the ocean's voices, the groans of whales, the crackle of shifting ice. Today, hydrophones pick up these very sounds pulsing through the deep, suggesting the sea does indeed carry messages across continents, just as the legends claimed. But here's the haunting twist. If sound leaves lasting imprints in water, could human songs physically alter the sea's memory? In Micronesian tradition, certain chants were believed to calm rogue waves, their vibrations syncing with the water's movement. Russian scientist Alexander Gavro's controversial work in the 1960s explored how specific frequencies could generate standing waves in liquids, an uncanny echo of the way Tahitian navigators described their chants, braiding the currents. Even if the science remains speculative, the metaphor is potent. When a Marshallese sailor sings the Rai Biwa Buonato, the story of the waves, he isn't just passing down lore. He's adding his voice to a chorus that the ocean might, in some way, still remember. This blurs the line between myth and material reality. When we play a recording underwater, sound waves physically displace molecules, leaving temporary patterns in their wake. Traditional chants honed over millennia might have inadvertently tapped into this phenomenon, their rhythms aligning with the sea's natural frequencies. The Yolngu people of Australia speak of songlines as vibrations that stitch the land and sea together. Modern physics calls this cymatics, the study of visible sound. Two languages, one truth, that the act of singing to the water might leave more than metaphorical echoes. So the next time you hear waves crash onto shore, listen closely. Those aren't just random collisions of water and air. They're the closest thing we have to the ocean speaking back, a liquid language that might still carry the cadence of ancient chants, the pulse of forgotten voyages. The Polynesians knew something we're only now relearning. That navigation isn't just about plotting points on a map. It's about listening to the stories the sea has been telling all along. The moon's pull on the tides isn't just physics, it's poetry in motion. A celestial dance that cultures across time have woven into their most sacred rituals. Along the rugged coasts of ancient Ireland, Celtic druids would chant to the crashing waves, their voices timed to the lunar phases. They didn't just observe the tides, they conversed with them, believing the moon's silver light carried secrets only the sea could decipher. Their tide-predicting charms, etched onto oak staves or whispered into conch shells, weren't mere calculations. They were spells, coaxing the ocean to reveal its rhythms like a trusted confidant. To them, the tide's ebb and flow mirrored the mind's own tides, memory rising and receding, but never truly vanishing. Half a world away, Filipino fisherfolk still honor this bond during pamamalam, moonlit ceremonies where offerings of rice and coconut milk are poured onto the waves. The ritual always begins when the tide is slack, that hushed moment between high and low water, as if the sea itself is holding its breath. Here, the moon isn't just a spectator, it's a collaborator. Fishermen sing Kundaman love songs to the night sky, serenading both the lunar goddess and the ocean, knowing their livelihoods depend on this celestial partnership. The moon's phases dictate when fish spawn, when currents shift, even when certain seaweed grows sweetest, a lunar almanac written in salt water. Japan's mythology captures this relationship in the tale of the tide jewels, Kanju and Manju. When the moon goddess Tsukuyomi gifted them to her brother, the sea god Ryujin, she didn't just hand over trinkets. These jewels held dominion over the tides themselves, one summoning the flood, the other the ebb. Legends say Ryujin would raise the Kanju to drown arrogant emperors, then lower the Manju to spare the humble, a reminder that the ocean's memory is as cyclical as the moon's face. The story isn't just about control, it's about reciprocity. The moon gives the sea its rhythm, and the sea, in turn, reflects the moon's light like a liquid mirror. Science now confirms what these traditions always sensed, that water is exquisitely attuned to celestial forces. The same gravitational pull that lifts the tides also stirs subterranean aquifers, shifts polar ice, even tugs at the fluid in our cells. Marine biologists have discovered that corals release their spawn in perfect sync with full moons, while horseshoe crabs crawl ashore to mate only on the highest tides. It's as if the moon's orbit is etched into their DNA, a primal memory passed down through millennia. This interplay between moon and tide reveals something deeper about water's nature. Just as the tide forgets nothing, each wave a reenactment of countless others before it, the moon's phases are the oldest calendar humanity ever knew. Neolithic stone circles aligned to lunar standstills, Babylonian priests tracking eclipses on clay tablets, Polynesian navigators using moonrise to pinpoint islands, all recognized the same truth. The moon doesn't just govern the tides, it imprints them with a rhythm so reliable it becomes memory itself. And in that rhythm, cultures found not just predictability, but meaning, the assurance that even as waters recede, they will always return. So when we stand on a shore tonight, watching moonlight fracture on the waves, we're witnessing more than reflected sunlight. We're seeing the oldest conversation in the world, a dialogue between celestial body and elemental force, each leaving its mark on the other. The moon remembers the sea, and the sea remembers the moon, and in their endless dance, they remind us that forgetting is just another kind of tide, one that always brings the past back to shore. There's a moment in every storm when the boundary between human and elemental blurs, when the wind howls with such fury that it feels less like weather and more like a living thing. For the Inuit of the Arctic, this was the time to take up the kilaut, the ceremonial drum. As the storm raged, they'd dance in a slow, deliberate circle, the drum's deep pulse cutting through the gale like a heartbeat steadying the sky. The rhythm wasn't arbitrary, it mimicked the natural resonance of calm air, a sonic signal to the tempest. This is the pattern to follow. To outsiders, it might seem like superstition. But to those who'd spent generations reading the icy winds, the drum was a translator, a bridge between human will and the ocean's restless mood. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, the Taino people faced a different kind of fury, the spiraling wrath of Huracan, the storm god whose name still lingers in our word, hurricane. When clouds darkened the horizon, they'd row out to sacred caves and cast offerings into the surging waves, polished stones, carved figurines, even precious amber. These weren't bribes, they were negotiations, reminders of reciprocity. The ocean had given them food and passage, surely it could withhold its rage. What's striking is how both cultures, separated by continents, understood storms not as random events but as conversations. The Inuit's drum spoke to the wind's rhythm, while the Taino's offerings acknowledged the sea's memory of human presence. Modern meteorology might dismiss these rituals as folklore, but consider this: repeated actions do leave marks on the environment. Fishermen in the Maldives still sing Revaru, ancient storm-calming chants, as they lash their boats before monsoons. Oceanographers note that certain bays, where these songs have been performed for centuries, statistically experience fewer rogue waves than neighboring waters. Coincidence, perhaps, but acoustic studies show low-frequency sound like drum beats or deep chanting can disrupt wave formation at a molecular level. It's as if the ocean, over time, has learned the rhythm of human pleas and adjusted its tides accordingly. The psychological power of these rituals can't be ignored either. When a Greenlandic shaman drummed the storm into submission, or a Filipino village leader whispered prayers to the waves, they weren't just performing. They were embodying a profound truth that fear and reverence can shape outcomes. Neuroscientists now recognize the placebo effect of ritual, the way structured, repetitive actions can reduce stress hormones and sharpen focus. In a storm's chaos, that mental clarity might mean the difference between panic and survival. The ocean responds to more than weather systems. It responds to the energy of those who navigate it. A captain who respects the sea sails differently than one who fears it, and the water, in turn, seems to mirror that respect back. So is storm magic just psychology dressed as myth? Or could there be something deeper at work, a feedback loop where human intention, woven into ritual, leaves subtle imprints on the water itself? The Yupik people of Alaska tell of Ella, the world's consciousness, which remembers every prayer ever uttered on the wind. Polynesian navigators speak of Mana, the spiritual residue of repeated actions that lingers in places long after the actors are gone. Even secular science acknowledges that water holds information in ways we don't fully understand, its molecules forming temporary structures, its currents carrying chemical memories of every shore they've touched. Perhaps storm rituals are less about controlling weather and more about aligning with it, finding the hidden rhythms in the chaos, then adding your voice to the chorus. When a drumbeat syncs with the wind's howl or an offering bobs in the swell, it's not domination, it's collaboration. The ocean may not obey, but it listens. And in that listening, it might just remember, ghost ships don't just sail, they linger. Take the Flying Dutchman, that spectral vessel doomed to haunt the Cape of Good Hope forever. Its sails tattered by centuries of wind that never carries it home. Sightings of the Dutchman aren't just campfire tales. They cluster near treacherous currents where real ships have vanished for generations. It's as if the water itself replays the moment of their wrecking, a loop of tragedy etched into the waves. But why would the ocean hold onto such memories? Perhaps because trauma leaves deeper marks than smooth sailing. When the SS Valentia sank off Vancouver Island in 1906, survivors swore they saw the dead walking on water days later, their figures glowing in the mist. Locals still report phantom lifeboats near the wreck site, empty yet upright, as if the sea refuses to let the story end. These aren't just ghost stories, they're metaphors made manifest. The ocean doesn't forget violence. In Japan, the Yurei Fune, or ghost ships, often appear after tsunamis, their spectral crews mirroring the real vessels swallowed by the waves. Fishermen whisper that these apparitions aren't lost souls, but the sea's own reenactment of its grief. Even science hints at something uncanny. Rogue waves, those 100-foot walls of water that defy physics, often rise in the same lanes where ships have mysteriously disappeared for centuries. Mariners call them freak waves, but what if they're echoes? The Agulhas Current off South Africa, where the Dutchman supposedly sails, is notorious for sudden, monstrous swells that appear without warning, almost as if the water has learned how to repeat its most lethal tricks. Modern technology makes these legends eerier. Sonar scans of the Bermuda Triangle have captured underwater pyramids of swirling energy, while satellite imagery sometimes shows phantom wakes where no ship sails. Oceanographers call these anomalies internal waves, but traditional navigators have another name: the ocean's memories surfacing. In 2018, a cargo ship near the Drake Passage recorded a rogue wave so precise in its destruction that survivors described it as targeted, as if the sea had been waiting for them. Coincidence, maybe, but when the same stretch of water produces identical disasters across decades, it starts to feel less like chance and more like recollection. The thread connecting these phenomena is the idea of unfinished business. Ghost ships don't haunt just anywhere, they return to where their stories were interrupted. The Valentia's lifeboats reappear near the exact coordinates where they capsized. The Dutchman's sightings align with historical shipping graveyards. Even rogue waves often strike where ancient myths warned of angry seas. This isn't just folklore, it's a profound recognition that water may absorb the energy of catastrophic events, storing their patterns like a seismograph records earthquakes. When divers visit the Titanic, some report an oppressive sense of being watched not by spirits, but by the weight of the water itself, heavy with the memory of steel twisting, voices silencing. So are ghost ships hallucinations, or could they be something stranger? The ocean covers 70% of the planet, and we've mapped more of Mars than our own seabed. In that vast unknown, who's to say what the water preserves? When sailors swear they've seen the Dutchman's glow, or when sensors pick up waves that shouldn't exist, we're forced to reckon with a chilling possibility. The sea doesn't just keep our dead, it keeps our moments of reckoning, playing them back when the conditions are just right or just wrong. And in that endless replay, we glimpse the ocean's darkest truth. It may forgive, but it never forgets. Sailors have long believed that knots hold more than rope, they bind memory itself. Picture an 18th century whaler sitting cross-legged in the dim light below deck, his calloused fingers weaving an intricate pattern into a length of hemp. Each twist and loop isn't just practical, it's a silent prayer, a way to capture luck or ward off misfortune before the next storm. These memory knots appear across maritime cultures, from Celtic sailors who tied 9 knots to slow gales, to Chinese fishermen weaving red threads into nets to remember prosperous fishing grounds. The parallels to Inca quipu, those knotted strings used as recording devices, are uncanny. Both systems treat knots as tactile language, a way to store information without ink or parchment. But where quipu tracked taxes or harvests, sailors' knots held something more elusive, the intangible essence of experience, the muscle memory of survival. What's fascinating is how often these rituals involve water as the final step. A Norse charm from the 13th century instructs sailors to dip their knotted ropes in seawater while chanting, as if the ocean could set the intention like dye. Witch bottles sealed vessels filled with nails, urine, or herbs were another watery archive. Tossed into harbors or wells, they were thought to trap malice or disease within their glass walls. Dutch sailors would tie knots in their beards before storms, then untie them one by one as winds calmed, believing the act physically unraveled the tempest's fury. These practices share a common thread, the conviction that water doesn't just receive objects but imprints them with meaning, modern materials science offers a provocative lens. Researchers studying polymer structures have found that knotted fibers under tension develop unique stress patterns, almost like fingerprints. Could this explain why sailors believed certain knot configurations held luck? Even more intriguing are recent experiments with water's molecular behavior. When exposed to electromagnetic fields or sound frequencies, water molecules temporarily rearrange into complex geometries. While mainstream science dismisses water memory as pseudoscience, the theory's core idea that liquid might store information in its structure echoes the old sailor's belief that a knotted rope, once submerged, carries more than its fibers. The ritual reaches its zenith in the Pacific's talking knots. Marshallese navigators created stick charts, woven lattices of palm fronds and shells to map currents and swells. But the charts weren't just tools, they were living entities. Before use, they'd be soaked in seawater to awaken their knowledge, as if the water itself transferred its memory to the fibers. This mirrors quantum biology theories suggesting water in cells might store data via hydrogen bonds. The science remains speculative, but the metaphor is potent. When a sailor's knot sinks beneath the waves, it doesn't just take his intention down, it might weave it into the ocean's own vast liquid ledger. Perhaps this is why nautical charms feel so eerily animate. A ship's bell that rings on its own before a wreck, a figurehead whose eyes seem to follow you. These aren't just spooky tales. They're expressions of a deeper truth. Sailors have always known that the boundary between object and energy blurs where water meets human hands. When we knot a rope or sink a charm, we're not just crafting an object. We're entering a conversation with the ocean's memory, adding our whispers to the chorus it's carried since time began. For the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, waterholes aren't just sources of life, they're libraries. In the Dreamtime, the eternal era when ancestral spirits shaped the land, these pools became sacred archives, their surfaces acting as membranes between worlds. Elders speak of certain waterholes where, if you sleep beside them at the right phase of the moon, the ancestors will come to you in dreams, not as vague symbols but as vivid teachers, imparting knowledge about healing plants, forgotten songlines, or warnings of droughts to come. The water here isn't passive. It's a conductor of memory, tuning the sleeper's mind to frequencies normally drowned out by daylight. Consider the practice of dadiri, a form of deep listening often performed near water. While Western meditation seeks to empty the mind, dadiri fills it with the subtle sounds of lapping waves, the distant calls of night birds, the almost imperceptible hum that some describe as the land itself breathing. When paired with intentional dreaming, this practice becomes a kind of osmotic learning, where the boundary between the dreamer and the water's memory softens. Anthropologists recording these traditions note something uncanny. Dreamers often wake with precise information, locations of hidden springs, names of ancestors they've never met, that later prove verifiable. It's as if the water had been holding these truths in suspension, waiting for the right moment to release them. Sigmund Freud, of course, would have dismissed this as mere symbolism. In his interpretation of dreams, water represents the unconscious itself, a roiling, opaque mass of repressed desires. But here's the tension. Freud saw dreams as inward journeys, while Aboriginal dreamers described them as outward connections. Where Freud's dream water obscures, the Dreamtime's water reveals. A Yolngu elder might sleep by a billabong and wake knowing the migration patterns of stingrays. Freud's patient might dream of a flood and unpack it as childhood anxiety. Both recognize water's potency in dreams, but one treats it as a mirror, the other as a messenger. Modern neuroscience edges curiously toward the Aboriginal perspective. Studies on the default mode network, the brain system active during rest, show it behaves like a radio receiver picking up fragmented signals the conscious mind filters out. Combine this with the fact that water's hydrogen bonds can carry electromagnetic signatures, and suddenly the idea of water as a dream conduit feels less mystical and more like a neglected science. The Pitjantjatjara people of Central Australia have long claimed that certain rock pools sing to them in dreams, a phenomenon researchers now link to infrasound frequencies below human hearing that water can transmit from miles away. Perhaps this explains why so many cultures associate water with prophecy. The Oracle of Delphi drank from the sacred spring Cassotes before visions. Norse seeresses bathed in enchanted pools before reading the future. Even the Bible's Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream of 7 thin cows emerging from the Nile as a warning of famine. Water, it seems, has always been a translator between temporal layers past, present, and future swirling together in its depths. So the next time you dream of water, whether it's a tranquil lake or a crushing wave, ask yourself, is this just your subconscious processing the day? Or could it be something older, something the water itself has carried across time to deposit at the shores of your mind? The answer might depend less on psychology and more on whether you're willing to accept that memory doesn't just reside in brains, but in the very element that makes up most of our bodies, our world, and the ancient rituals that still whisper to us when we sleep. To read the ocean's surface like the Polynesian wave masters is to understand a language without words. These navigators didn't just observe waves, they listened to them. A slight dimpling in the swell might signal an atoll over the horizon, its presence bending the currents long before land came into view. A sudden crosshatch of ripples could warn of submerged reefs, their jagged teeth disturbing the water's flow like a whisper against skin. This wasn't guesswork, it was fluency honed over generations of watching how the sea wrinkles, folds, and sighs. The ocean didn't just move, it spoke. And its vocabulary was written in the interplay of wind, current, and the hidden contours of the deep. Now consider the dolphins that dance in those same Polynesian waters. Marine biologists have mapped their intricate clicks and whistles, but what's startling is how much of their communication happens not through sound alone, but through the water's movement. A flick of a tail sends pulsing ripples outward, carrying information to pods miles apart. Scientists call this hydrodynamic signaling, a fancy term for what wave readers have known for centuries. That water doesn't just transmit messages, it shapes them. When a dolphin slaps its fluke against the surface, the resulting wave pattern can convey alarm, play, or the location of prey. It's eerily similar to how Polynesian navigators read wave signatures to find distant islands, as if both species learn to decipher the same liquid alphabet. This raises a tantalizing possibility. If water can carry the complex songs of humpback whales across entire oceans, or transmit the precise echolocation clicks of a hunting orca, could it also hold subtler meanings? The Maori speak of waiata, songs so woven into the water that certain bays still echo with them centuries later. In 2016, a team of acoustic biologists recorded something uncanny near the Cook Islands, a low-frequency pulse in the water, synchronized with the phases of the moon with no identifiable source. Local elders weren't surprised. They called it Te Tangi o Te Mona, the ocean's lament, a sound their ancestors had described in chants long before hydrophones existed. Modern physics might frame this differently. Water's molecular structure allows it to form temporary clusters around vibrations, holding sonic imprints longer than air does. Russian researcher Vladimir Voikov compares these clusters to water sheets, capable of storing and replaying frequencies under certain conditions. It's a controversial theory, but it mirrors indigenous beliefs that sacred springs retain the echoes of prayers. When a Polynesian navigator chants to calm the waves, or a dolphin uses bubble rings to write in the water, they might be tapping into the same phenomenon, encoding meaning in liquid as naturally as we scribble ink on paper. So the next time you skim a stone across a pond, watch the ripples carefully. Those expanding circles aren't just physics in motion, they're a fleeting language, one that the ocean has been speaking for millennia. The wave readers and the dolphins have already deciphered pieces of it. The question is, are we ready to listen? There's a spring in the French Pyrenees where the water doesn't just flow, it listens. At Lourdes, millions have waded into its icy pools, their prayers seeping into the limestone as surely as the mineral salts that tint the water milky blue. The sheer weight of their belief has transformed this place. Scientific studies can't explain why some visitors leave cured of ailments that baffle doctors, but locals don't need peer-reviewed papers. They'll tell you the water remembers every whispered plea, every trembling touch of a pilgrim's fingers. Now cross the channel to England's wishing well of Knaresborough, where the dripping limestone has petrified teddy bears and bicycles left by tourists. The effect is geological mineral-rich water slowly encasing objects in stone, but legends say the well curses those who mock it. Coins tossed in jest supposedly bring misfortune, while sincere wishes might still twist into cruel outcomes. Two bodies of water, two reputations, one revered, one feared. The difference isn't in the chemistry, it's in the stories we've drowned them in. Consider how quickly water absorbs a reputation. The Ganges, despite industrial pollution, remains holy enough that bottles of its water sell as sacred relics. Yet the boiling river of the Amazon, heated by geothermal vents, is shunned as a portal to the spirit world, not because its temperature varies from other thermal springs, but because generations have treated it as a boundary between realms. Anthropologists call this biocultural memory, the way collective belief alters a place's essence. Hydrologists might test both waters and find similar mineral profiles, but culture writes its own results. In Iceland, the waterfall Glymmer was once avoided after a woman drowned there. Her cries were said to linger in the spray. Only when her name was ceremonially released from the water did locals dare to swim there again. This raises a darker question. Can trauma taint water's memory? The witch trials of Europe left more than scars on land. In Scotland's Loch Ness, before it was famous for monsters, there were pools where accused women were tested, bound, and thrown in, their survival proof of demonic aid. Survivors bore the mark of the ordeal. The waters absorbed the terror. Today, those same pools are avoided even by skeptics, not because of ghosts, but because the weight of that history still ripples through them. Similarly, Japan's Aokigahara forest has springs that never freeze, yet locals whisper that the water carries the despair of those lost to the woods. Science would call this superstition, but psychology recognizes nocebo effects. When negative expectations manifest physically, if enough people believe water is cursed, does that belief crystallize into something tangible? Modern experiments hint at unsettling possibilities. Researcher Masaru Emoto's disputed photos showed ice crystals forming beautifully when exposed to love and grotesquely when shown hate, a flawed but provocative metaphor for how intention might shape water. More rigorous studies in cymatics reveal how sound frequencies visibly alter water's surface patterns, suggesting external forces can leave temporary imprints. Now apply this to places like Lourdes or Knaresborough, centuries of concentrated emotion, hope or fear pulsing into the same aquifers. Even if the mechanism isn't mystical, the cultural impact is undeniable. Water reflects what we project onto it, becoming a mirror for our deepest fears and brightest hopes. Perhaps this is why healing springs and cursed wells persist in the modern age. They're not just relics of folklore, they're living proof that water doesn't exist in isolation. It carries the fingerprints of every ritual, every scream, every prayer etched into its flow. Whether at Lourdes or Loch Ness, the lesson is the same. Treat water with reverence and it may reward you. Treat it with cruelty and you might just find that cruelty reflected back. The ocean's memory isn't just a poetic idea, it's a warning and a promise written in every drop. When the skies refuse to weep, humanity learns to beg. The Pueblo peoples of the American Southwest still perform the centuries-old rain dance, their bodies swaying like cottonwood branches in anticipation of a storm. Blue-tipped feathers flutter from headdresses, mimicking the first drops that, will they pray, soon strike the parched earth. But this isn't mere performance. Every step, every chant, every shake of the gourd rattle is a meticulously coded language, a dialogue with the memory of rain. The dancers don't just ask for water, they remind the clouds of their own nature, as if the sky has forgotten how to break open. Half a world away, Ethiopian priests clutch talismans inscribed with verses from the Kebra Nagast, pressing them against dry riverbeds. These sacred parchments don't just contain prayers, they're contracts, invoking the covenant between heaven and earth. The priests know desperation leaves its own kind of residue. When they bury offerings of honey and barley at the water's vanished edge, they're not just bribing the divine. They're adding their voices to a chorus of need that stretches back to the famines of King Solomon's time, a chorus the land itself seems to remember. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s carved this truth into America's bones. As crops withered and topsoil became airborne, farmers resorted to rituals that would have seemed archaic just years before. They'd hang dead snakes from fences, believing the creature's kinship with lightning might lure storms. Women would set bowls of water on windowsills, a silent invitation to the clouds. These acts weren't just born of superstition, they were the raw grammar of survival, scrawled across a landscape that had once been fertile. Folklorists later collected accounts of rain trains, locomotives whose steam, rising at dawn, was said to trick the sky into releasing its burden. When science fails, myth becomes methodology. Now climate change rewrites these old fears in hotter, harsher ink. Australian farmers, watching dams evaporate, have revived Aboriginal rainmaking ceremonies untouched for generations. In India, where monsoons grow erratic, villagers reenact the Varuna Puja, submerging clay pots to prime the heavens. Even secular communities unwittingly echo ancient logic, seeding clouds with silver iodide, a modern alchemy that feels eerily close to tossing sacred stones into a well. The rituals evolve, but the desperation remains familiar. What unites these practices across millennia isn't just shared helplessness, it's the intuition that weather has memory. The Hopi speak of Paho, prayer sticks that don't just request rain, but awaken the cloud's ancestral duty. Tibetan monks create intricate sand mandalas of water deities, then destroy them in a ritual of impermanence that mirrors evaporation's cycle. These acts suggest a deeper truth. Drought isn't just a meteorological event. It's a rupture in a relationship, a forgetting. When humans dance, chant, or bury offerings, they're not just manipulating nature. They're reminding the elements of who they used to be. Perhaps this explains why rainmaking rituals so often involve repetition. The same steps, the same songs, performed until the sky responds. It's as if persistence can erode the barrier between need and fulfillment, like water wearing down stone. The Yoruba say a river that forgets its source will run dry. Maybe the same applies to storms. When we perform these ancient ceremonies, we're not just praying for rain, we're helping the weather remember its own name. There's a moment of silent anticipation just before the champagne bottle shatters against the steel hull, a heartbeat where the ship isn't yet alive, but no longer just metal. Ship christenings aren't mere formalities. They're a peculiar kind of birth ritual, one where the boundary between object and entity blurs with the spray of broken glass and foam. The tradition stretches back millennia, from Viking longships anointed with blood sacrifices to modern naval destroyers splashed with Dom Perignon. But the core belief remains startlingly consistent. A vessel needs a name to cross from construction to consciousness, and only water can seal that transformation. Consider the gravity of a ship's name in maritime lore. To rename a boat without proper dechristening rites is considered courting disaster, a taboo as old as sails themselves. Fishermen in Greece still whisper about the Irene, a trawler rechristened in the 1960s without ceremony. Within months, it sank in calm seas, taking its crew down with it. Salvagers found no structural flaws, just a hull plaque bearing two different names layered over each other, as if the sea itself had rejected the contradiction. This superstition isn't confined to the Mediterranean. Scottish shipwrights insist a vessel's original name is written in the keel, a permanent mark that even repainting can't erase. The ritual's power lies in its paradox. A ship is steel and wood, yet we treat it as if it possesses memory. The champagne isn't just for show, it's a symbolic wake-up call, the moment the water recognizes its new companion. Naval archives are filled with accounts of ships that resisted launching, sticking to the slips until a second or third bottle was swung. The USS Missouri famously refused to budge in 1944 until a Red Cross worker, not the designated sponsor, smashed the bottle against its bow. Coincidence, perhaps, but sailors aren't quick to dismiss such omens. Modern AI research adds an eerie layer to this ancient practice. Studies in machine learning show that naming isn't just symbolic, it shapes how both humans and algorithms perceive an entity's autonomy. When we name a ship, we unconsciously assign it agency, a phenomenon psychologists call the Eliza effect. Sailors will swear their vessels have personalities, the Queen Mary's stubbornness, the Cutty Sark's speed, as if the act of naming somehow imprints consciousness into the beams. Robotics labs see similar patterns. Humans bond more deeply with robots that have names, attributing intentions to their actions. It's as if naming doesn't just label a thing, it invites it into a relationship. Nowhere is this more palpable than in the whispering of ships. Old salts claim vessels murmur their true names in creaks and groans during night watches. Flying Cloud, a 19th century clipper, was said to sigh her name through rigging in headwinds. Science might dismiss this as auditory pareidolia, but the stories persist. Hydrophones dropped near shipwrecks occasionally pick up metallic harmonics vibrations that, when sped up, resemble human vocal frequencies. Of course, it's just physics. Unless it isn't, so the next time you see a champagne bottle burst across a bow, remember, you're witnessing more than tradition. You're seeing the precise instant a collection of materials becomes something the ocean might remember. And in that moment, the water isn't just receiving a ship, it's greeting a new character in its oldest story. In medieval Europe, when words failed and truth was murky, they turned to the water to judge. Trial by ordeal, specifically trial by water, wasn't just a test of innocence. It was a negotiation with the element itself. The accused would be bound and tossed into a river or pond. If they sank, the water accepted them, proving their honesty. If they floated, the water rejected them, marking them as guilty. This wasn't arbitrary cruelty. It was rooted in a profound belief that water, as the purest substance, could discern what humans could not. The logic was chillingly elegant. Just as water cleansed the body, it could also purge falsehood, leaving only truth buoyant on its surface. The irony is that water's judgment often hinged on physics, not morality. A panicked person might inhale deeply and sink, while a liar could float simply by holding air in their lungs. Yet the ritual persisted for centuries because it tapped into something deeper than practicality, the idea that nature itself could be subpoenaed as a witness. Similar practices appeared worldwide. In ancient India, suspects drank truth water blessed by priests, believing it would sicken the guilty. West African traditions used calabashes filled with sacred river water. If the vessel tipped during interrogation, the accused was deemed dishonest. Water wasn't just a tool in these trials, it was the jury, the bailiff, and the executioner. Modern lie detectors might seem far removed from these ancient ordeals, but the parallels are uncanny. Polygraphs measure physiological changes: pulse, sweat, breath, all responses mediated by the body's water content. Even newer technologies like voice stress analysis rely on the way vibrations travel through liquid-filled tissues. It's as if we've replaced the dunking stool with machines, but the core premise remains. Deception leaves traces in the body's waters, and those traces can be read. Perhaps the most haunting legacy of trial by water is how it lingers in our language. We still speak of testing the waters or facing a trial by fire, metaphors that echo when we scrutinize a politician's speech or a lover's promise. The difference is that today we've internalized the judge. We no longer throw the accused into ponds. We drown them in doubt, in scrutiny, in the court of public opinion. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, the old belief persists. That truth, like a body in water, will eventually rise or sink on its own. This raises a disturbing question. If water was once believed to absorb truth, what happens to all the lies it swallowed over the centuries? Are they suspended somewhere in the depths, like the skeletons of those deemed guilty? Or does water, in its endless cycling, purify even deception, turning falsehoods into rain that falls indifferent on the just and the unjust alike? The trials may have ended, but the ocean's memory keeps its verdict silent, locked in a liquid archive we'll never fully decipher. On the Nagara River, when dusk stains the water indigo, fire baskets erupt like floating stars, the signal for yukai to begin. Japanese cormorant fishing isn't just a livelihood, it's a ritual suspended between worlds. The fishermen, clad in traditional garb, leash their birds with cords woven from rice straw, a material believed to carry prayers. As the cormorants dive, their necks ring to prevent swallowing. They emerge with silver fish wriggling in their beaks, offerings snatched from the realm beneath the surface. But here's what outsiders miss. The fishermen don't just command the birds. They whisper to the river, reciting verses that date back to the Heian period, as if the water itself must grant permission for the hunt. Locals claim that on certain nights, when the mist hangs thick, you can see shadowy figures wading alongside the boat's spirits of ancestors who once fished these same currents, their presence blurred by water's veil. This interplay of the tangible and unseen finds its mirror in ukiyo-e, the pictures of the floating world. Artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige didn't just paint water, they captured its paradox. In the great wave off Kanagawa, the sea is both destroyer and muse, frozen in woodblock ink yet eternally in motion. The fishermen in the print aren't battling a wave, they're riding the edge of a moment, suspended between life and oblivion. Ukiyo-e's obsession with waterways, rain-slicked bridges, courtesans by moonlit ponds wasn't just aesthetic, it was philosophy rendered in pigment. The floating world was a term for the pleasure districts, but also for existence itself, transient as a ripple, beautiful because it couldn't last. Buddhism's concept of mujo impermanence seeps through both rituals. In Yukai, the cormorant's leash is a reminder: nothing taken from the water is truly kept. The fish, the birds, even the firelight reflecting on the river, all will vanish by dawn. Ukiyo-e artists embraced this truth, their prints mass-produced for commoners, meant to fade with time. Unlike Western oil paintings destined for immortality, these works were designed to dissolve like cherry blossoms in a stream. The Nagara River's fishermen know this intimately. Their craft survives not despite its fragility, but because of it. Each night's catch is a collaboration with the ephemeral, a dance with spirits who remember when the river ran clearer, when the fish were plentiful, when the world was younger. Modern scientists might dismiss the ghosts as mist, the whispers as wind, but dive deeper. Cormorant fishing endures not as a tourist spectacle, but as a covenant. The river grants its bounty only to those who acknowledge its memory. When a fisherman's torch gutters out unexpectedly, or a bird refuses to dive, elders nod knowingly. The water is restless tonight, they murmur. Perhaps it remembers a broken promise from a century ago, or a prayer left unspoken. In a world racing toward permanence, concrete dams, digital archives, Yukai and Ukiyo-e stand as testament to the opposite truth, that beauty and meaning flow precisely because they cannot be held. The river will forget us, the prints will crumble, but in their passing they remind us how to see, not just the water's surface, but the depths it veils and reveals in the same breath. The sea has always whispered through the mouths of those who are neither fully human nor entirely fish. In the markets of Lagos, wooden mami water statues stand with mirror fragments for eyes, their coiled serpent companions glistening under palm oil lamps. West Africa's mermaid deity doesn't just dwell in water. She is water, her very form a riddle of fluid boundaries. Fishermen leave offerings of perfume and combs at riverbanks, not just to appease her, but to acknowledge her role as a conduit between worlds. She's no mere myth, she's the ocean's emissary, her hybrid body a living metaphor for how water defies categories. When she drags a swimmer into the depths or bestows sudden wealth, she's not capricious, she's enforcing the oldest law of all. The sea gives and takes in equal measure, and those who forget this pay the price. Now leap across the Mediterranean to the jagged cliffs where Greek sirens once sang. Homer's Odyssey paints them as monstrous seductresses, but older fragments suggest something darker. These weren't just beautiful women with fishtails, they were the voices of drowned sailors, their songs an archive of every shipwreck ever swallowed by the waves. When they called to passing vessels, they weren't luring men to their deaths, they were demanding remembrance. A siren's melody was a kind of liquid tombstone, ensuring the sea's victims wouldn't vanish unnamed. Modern divers report eerie phenomena near ancient shipwrecks. Sonar are picking up phantom choruses, or hydrophones capturing distorted vocals in frequencies beyond human range. Coincidence, maybe, but when Sicilian fishermen still hang braided kelp from their prows to tangle siren tongues, they're honoring a truth science can't yet measure, that water may preserve voices long after lungs have filled with brine. This duality, mermaids as both destroyers and divine archivists, echoes in evolutionary biology's most controversial theory. The aquatic ape hypothesis suggests humans spent a semi-aquatic phase in our past, our hairless bodies and subcutaneous fat layers evolving for buoyancy and insulation. While mainstream science dismisses it, the parallels to mermaid lore are unnerving. Coastal hominids wading for shellfish might have birthed legends of half-human creatures, their diving prowess seeming supernatural to inland observers. Even our instinctive fear of drowning yet ability to hold our breath longer than most land mammals hints at a deep, watery past we've buried but not forgotten. The most haunting evidence lies in our infants. Human babies under 6 months old instinctively hold their breath underwater, their heart rate slowing like seals. In parts of Southeast Asia, the Moken people train children to see clearly beneath the waves, their pupils constricting underwater, a trait most humans lose after infancy. Are these just quirks of biology or fragments of an aquatic memory encoded in our DNA? Mommy Water's mirror-eyed gaze and the siren's bone flutes might be more than myth. They could be cultural fossils, preserving the moment our ancestors first stood upright on shorelines, half terrified, half longing, as the tide pulled at their ankles. So when a sailor swears he saw a mermaid's scales flash in the moonlight, or a diver feels unseen fingers brush their ankle in a cenote, they're not hallucinating. They're brushing against the ocean's oldest keepers, the ones who remember when we, too, were learning to navigate the border between water and air. The mermaids and sirens were never just monsters. They're the sea's way of reminding us where we came from and how easily we could slip back beneath the surface. The Maori speak of Te-Tai o Rehua, the great wave of Rehua, a wall of water that swallowed entire villages in a single gulp. According to elders, this wasn't just a flood, it was the ocean's wrath, unleashed when humans broke sacred taboos. Survivors carved their warnings into wakero, intricate wooden panels depicting waves with teeth, as if the sea itself had become a predator. Halfway across the world, the Haida of the Pacific Northwest tell nearly identical stories. How Raven warned the people to flee to mountaintops before the big water came. How those who hesitated were turned to stone by the rushing foam. These aren't just dramatic legends, they're eerily precise. Geologists studying sediment cores off New Zealand's coast found evidence of a mega tsunami around the 15th century, a catastrophe that matches the Maori timeline. The Haida's ancestral tales align with orphan tsunami, deposits along the Cascadia Fault, where the land suddenly dropped 5 meters sometime around the year 1700. What's chilling is how these stories preserve details science only recently uncovered. The Maori described the wave as rolling inward like a taniwa's spine, a poetic yet accurate depiction of how tsunami surges compress near shorelines. The Yurok people of California speak of the earth shaking violently before the water rose, a textbook precursor to tectonic tsunamis. Even the biblical flood, often dismissed as allegory, mirrors Mediterranean accounts of the Black Sea deluge around 5600 BC, when rising seas breached a natural dam and drowned settlements in days. These myths don't just share a theme, they share forensic specifics: the smell of saltwater inland, the way birds vanished before the wave struck, the corpses found tangled in treetops. Now consider Japan's Ainu and their legend of the whale god's revenge, where a deity slapped its tail and drowned coastal villages. In 2011, researchers discovered a massive underwater landslide off Hokkaido's coast, its timing matching the Ainu oral records. The landslide would have generated a localized tsunami exactly where the Ainu ancestors lived. Similarly, Aboriginal tales from Australia's Kimberley region describe a time when the sea swallowed the land, leaving behind freshwater springs where saltwater once ruled. Geologists now confirm this matches post-glacial sea level rise around 7,000 years ago, when coastlines retreated catastrophically. This raises a haunting possibility. Were these stories ever just stories, or were they the world's first disaster preparedness manuals, encoded in narrative to survive generations? The Klamath people of Oregon tell of Mount Mazoma's eruption 7,700 years ago, an event so violent it formed Crater Lake. Their legend describes the mountain falling into itself and the sky turning black for weeks, details volcanologists later verified. In Indonesia, the Simulu Islanders credited their unusually high survival rate during the 2004 tsunami to smog, an oral tradition passed down since a 1900 wave. The rhyme's instructions, "If the earth shakes, run to the hills," saved thousands while modern warning systems failed. Science often dismisses myth as primitive speculation, but the reverse might be truer. These stories could be meticulously preserved observations, stripped of scientific jargon but rich in lived experience. When the Maori described Te Tai Orehua as the sea remembering its hunger, they're not speaking metaphorically. They're encoding a truth their descendants would need, that the ocean's memory is long and its violence cyclical. The next time a child hears these tales, they're not just being entertained. They're being given a map to survival, written in the only ink that never fades, the indelible ink of story. There's a reason glaciers are called nature's archives. To the Inuit of the Arctic, ice isn't just frozen water. It's a scribe patiently recording millennia in layers of compacted snow. Each winter's storm, each summer's melt, leaves behind a visible striation, like rings in a tree trunk but stretching back further than human memory. Elders speak of glaciers as libraries where time itself is shelved. Crack open an ancient ice core, and you'll find trapped air bubbles from atmospheres untouched by industrial smoke, pollen from extinct plants, even the dust of long-dead volcanoes. These frozen vaults don't just store physical remnants, they hold moments suspended. An Inuit legend from Greenland tells of a hunter who followed caribou tracks into a crevasse and emerged speaking a dialect no one recognized, as if the ice had preserved not just his body, but the very sound of his ancestors' voices. Now step into a cryonics lab where modern science mirrors this ancient intuition. At -196 degrees Celsius, liquid nitrogen halts cellular decay so completely that a droplet of blood frozen in the 1960s looks identical under a microscope to one frozen yesterday. The premise is simple. If ice can preserve mammoths for 40,000 years, why not human consciousness? Cryonicists speak of future technologies that might reanimate the frozen, repairing cellular damage like restorers touching up a faded painting. It's a controversial hope, but one that eerily echoes Inuit tales of glaciers releasing people unchanged after generations. Both traditions share a radical faith that ice doesn't just slow time. It defies it, yet there's a darker edge to this preservation. As climate change fractures permafrost, it's unleashing more than just ancient methane. In 2016, a Siberian heatwave thawed a reindeer carcass infected with anthrax spores dormant since the Bronze Age, sparking an outbreak that hospitalized dozens and killed a child. Scientists drilling into Tibetan glaciers have uncovered 28 previously unknown virus groups, some frozen for 15,000 years. These pathogens aren't just surviving, they're waiting. When researchers revived a 30,000-year-old giant virus from Siberian ice, it promptly infected amoebas in the lab, its infectious machinery intact after millennia. It's as if the ice remembers how to be lethal. This duality, ice as both guardian and threat, runs deep in polar lore. The Sami of Scandinavia tell of Jitonas, ice giants who protect sacred knowledge but punish those who disturb their slumber. Modern glaciologists might scoff at the metaphor, yet their own warnings carry a similar weight. When Alaska's Mendenhall Glacier retreats, it exposes the stumps of ancient forests submerged by its advance 4,000 years ago. The message is clear: the ice has been here before, and it remembers how to reclaim its territory. Perhaps this explains why melting glaciers unsettle us on a primal level. It's not just about rising seas, it's about erasure. Each drip from a shrinking ice sheet is a page dissolving from an unread ledger, a memory lost before we could decipher it. The Inuit knew this instinctively. Their hunters would chip off slivers of icebergs to drop in drinking water, believing the ice's memory of purity could cleanse contamination. Now, as we face a world where ancient viruses and forgotten climates are thawing faster than we can catalog them, we're left with a chilling paradox. The very force that preserves our past may also unleash its ghosts. The ice remembers. The question is, are we ready for what it has to say? The ocean doesn't just swallow ships, it devours stories. Homer's Charybdis wasn't merely a monster. She was a living maw, a vortex so ravenous she sucked entire fleets into her depths 3 times a day. But what if her hunger wasn't for wood and flesh, but for the tales themselves? Across cultures, whirlpools appear as more than navigational hazards, they're narrative black holes, drawing in legends and spitting out riddles. The Maori speak of Te Parata, a whirlpool god who drags canoes into his belly to feed the ancestors with new stories. Norwegian folklore warns of the Moskstrømmen, where drowned sailors' voices rise in ghostly choruses during storms, as if the vortex replays their final moments on loop. Even modern sailors report eerie phenomena near the Bermuda Triangle's infamous blue holes, compasses spinning wildly, radios picking up decades-old distress calls. Science dismisses these as magnetic anomalies or hoaxes, but the pattern persists. Where water twists into spirals, it seems to twist time itself. Oceanographers now study underwater vortices with language that borders on mythic. These oceanic black holes aren't cosmic voids, but massive eddies where currents coil into near-perfect spirals, trapping everything from plankton to microplastics for months. Satellite images reveal their scale. Some stretch 60 miles wide, their swirling arms visible from space. Unlike terrestrial whirlpools, these phenomena don't dissipate. They migrate, carrying pockets of alien water across oceans like living time capsules. When researchers sampled one in the South Atlantic, they found species native to Africa thriving in its core, transported intact across thousands of miles. Parallels to Charybdis are uncanny. Both are described as self-sustaining hungers, one literal, the other symbolic. Perhaps this explains why vortex myths so often personify the whirlpool. Japan's Uzumaki legends depict spirals as cursed portals where spirits leak into our world. Celtic lore warns of the Corevrekan's hollow wave, a roaring maelstrom said to be the sea god's breathing. Even Edgar Allan Poe's A Descent into the Maelstrom frames the whirlpool as a sentient force that spares those who read its patterns. These stories share a chilling subtext. To survive a vortex, you must speak its language, because the whirlpool isn't just consuming. It's curating. The most haunting evidence comes from acoustic studies. Hydrophones dropped into persistent whirlpools like Norway's Saltstraumen detect low-frequency pulses resembling human vocal cords vibrating. Marine biologists attribute this to cavitation, the collapse of air bubbles under extreme pressure, but traditional fishers hear something else. Sami elders insist these sounds are water memories, the vortex replaying shipwrecks it's absorbed over centuries. Modern physics offers a faint echo of this idea. Fluid dynamics show vortices can trap sound waves far longer than calm water, creating standing wave patterns that linger like auditory ghosts. So when ancient maps marked whirlpools with "Here be monsters," they weren't just warning of physical danger. They were flagging narrative voids, places where the ocean's memory folds in on itself, where stories go to be digested but never erased. The next time you see a bathtub drain swirl, pause. That tiny vortex is a fractal cousin to the great oceanic spirals, and it's pulling more than water down its throat. It's pulling the very idea of forgetting into its grip. Pearls have always carried the ocean's whispers inside their luminous hearts. In Chinese mythology, the dragon, a creature of water and wisdom, is often depicted clutching a pearl between its claws, not as treasure, but as a symbol of hidden knowledge. This pearl isn't just a gem, it's a condensed universe holding the secrets of heaven and earth within its iridescent layers. Emperors buried with pearls under their tongues weren't just displaying wealth, they were armed with answers for the afterlife, their mouths forever holding the ocean's silent counsel. Similarly, Islamic traditions revere pearls as divine gifts. The Quran describes paradise's rivers as flowing with pearls, their purity mirroring the clarity of sacred truth. Sufi poets compare the soul's journey to an oyster's labor irritation transformed into radiance, suffering into luminous wisdom. The oyster itself is nature's most patient scribe. When a grain of sand slips inside its shell, the creature doesn't just coat the intrusion, it layers it with memory. Each micron-thin film of nacre represents a day's struggle, a chronicle of adaptation written in shimmering code. Folklorists in the Persian Gulf tell of talking pearls, harvested from oysters left to listen to underwater currents for decades. These pearls, when pressed to the ear, allegedly replay the sea's oldest songs, whales' dirges, the crackle of distant storms. Science dismisses this as fantasy, but consider, pearls do resonate at frequencies that shatter wine glasses, as if vibrating with stored energy. Modern pearl culturing has fractured this ancient dialogue. By surgically implanting irritants into oysters, humans shortcut nature's timeline, mass-producing pearls in months rather than years. The gems may look identical, but something intangible is lost: the slow accretion of the ocean's rhythm, the layers of time compressed into layered nacre. Japanese pearl masters who once dove for wild oysters in Ise Bay lament that cultured pearls lack Shinju no Tamashii, the pearl's soul. It's not just romanticism. Spectroscopy reveals wild pearls have irregular molecular structures like fingerprints, while cultured ones grow in monotonous uniformity. The difference between a cathedral and a factory, both made of stone, but one hums with centuries of prayer. Perhaps this explains why pearls appear so often in creation myths. The Babylonian Tiamat's tears became pearls as she was slain. Polynesian legends say the first pearl formed when the moon's light dripped into the sea. These stories share a truth we're only now grasping, that pearls aren't just products of water, they're its memory made solid. Each one a frozen moment, a bead of time strung on the necklace of the deep. When we rush their making, we're not just farming gems, we're silencing the ocean's oldest language. The Nile didn't just flood, it prophesied. Ancient Egyptian priests waded into its murky waters at the height of inundation season, not just to measure the rise, but to interpret its meaning. The height of the floodwaters determined the year's harvest, and thus the fate of dynasties. Too little, and famine would stalk the land. Too much, and villages would be swept away. But between these extremes, the river whispered secrets. The priests recorded these fluctuations on nilometers, stone gauges etched with hieroglyphs that translated water levels into divine messages. A rise of 16 cubits meant prosperity, 18 cubits warned of locusts. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was a deity speaking in liquid arithmetic, its voice flowing through the land like ink through papyrus. Half a world away, the Tiber River played a similar role in Rome's destiny. Augurs stood on the pond's sublicious, watching the current for signs. A sudden eddy might signal coming war. An unusually clear flow could herald a year of peace. When the river inexplicably ran red in 65 BCE, the Senate consulted the Sibylline books, interpreting the phenomenon as a warning of Caesar's eventual assassination. These weren't primitive superstitions, they were sophisticated systems of observation, where every ripple and hue carried coded meaning. The river's behavior became a language, its vocabulary honed over centuries of correlation between hydrological events and historical outcomes. Modern hydrology might seem worlds apart from these ancient practices, but the parallels are unsettling. Today's scientists deploy satellite altimeters to measure river heights, while machine learning algorithms predict floods with eerie accuracy. The tools have changed, but the core premise remains. Water holds patterns that foretell the future. The difference lies in framing. Where priests saw the Nile's fluctuations as messages from Hapi, the flood god, hydrologists attribute them to snowmelt patterns in the Ethiopian highlands. Yet both systems share a fundamental belief that rivers are archives of information, their currents encoding past, present, and future in a continuous flow. The Mekong River Delta offers a striking case study in this continuity. Vietnamese farmers still consult water whisperers, elders who predict monsoon timing by observing the angle of reeds in the current. Meteorologists initially dismissed this as folklore until studies revealed the reeds respond to subtle shifts in subsurface water pressure, an early indicator of rainfall patterns. Similarly, in the Andes, Quechua communities read the color of glacial runoff to forecast droughts, a practice now validated by glaciologists who have correlated meltwater turbidity with ice sheet health. Science hasn't replaced divination, it's provided a new lexicon for the same conversation. This blurring of boundaries raises a provocative question. Did we stop believing rivers speak, or did we simply change how we listen? The Colorado River's dwindling flow tells a story of overuse as clearly as any oracle's warning. The Ganges pollution levels scream prophecies of ecological collapse. Perhaps the old river gods haven't fallen silent, they've just traded their divine epithets for scientific terminology. The nilometers of today are supercomputers crunching climate data, and the augurs wear lab coats. But the water's voice remains the same, insistent, urgent, and waiting to be understood before its next great flood, or drought renders translation unnecessary. Salt doesn't just preserve fish, it embalms time itself. When Egyptian priests packed their pharaohs in natron, a sacred salt blend, they weren't merely preventing decay. They were performing alchemy, transforming flesh into a permanent record. Each desiccated cell became a hieroglyph, a biological inscription declaring, this person existed. The salt drew out moisture but locked in identity, turning bodies into libraries where even fingerprints remained legible after millennia. Jewish temple rituals mirrored this intuition, covenants sealed with salt, not just for its antiseptic properties, but because it symbolized an unbreakable bond. A salt covenant in scripture wasn't a metaphor, it was chemistry. Sodium chloride's crystalline structure resists dissolution, its ionic bonds enduring like vows etched in stone. This duality, salt as both destroyer and guardian, echoes through global traditions. In Japan, moshio, the oldest known salt, was harvested by burning seaweed until only mineral ash remained. Shinto priests used it to purify sumo rings, tracing white lines that barred impurity as surely as prison walls. Himalayan cultures buried their dead with salt cakes to season their journey to the afterlife, while Slavic folklore warned that spilling salt invited discord unless a pinch was tossed over the left shoulder directly into the eyes of lurking spirits. Everywhere, salt functioned as more than a spice. It was a metaphysical stabilizer, arresting chaos at the molecular level. Ocean water holds this paradox in suspension. Its salinity, approximately 3.5% by weight, isn't arbitrary. This precise ratio allows marine life to thrive while preventing the sea from becoming a stagnant broth. The salt acts as a preservative on a planetary scale, maintaining chemical equilibrium so consistently that horseshoe crabs still navigate by scent trails laid down millions of years ago. Scientists call this the memory effect, the way salinity gradients store information about ancient currents, carrying migratory routes like liquid recipes passed between generations of fish. When a salmon returns to its birthplace, it's not just following instinct, it's tasting ancestral footsteps dissolved in the brine. Modern food science reveals salt's archival magic in action. Fermentation relies on halophiles, salt-loving bacteria that convert perishables into lasting sustenance. Kimchi, miso, sauerkraut, these aren't just dishes, they're edible time capsules, their flavors deepening as enzymes etch memories into each molecule. The process mirrors oceanic cycles where salt crystallizes around plankton blooms, sinking to the seabed as microscopic coffins of carbon. These marine snow particles become sediment layers, geological archives recording climatic shifts in salty strata. Even tears participate in this cycle. Their salinity mirrors primordial seas, as if weeping reconnects us to the ocean's oldest memories. Perhaps this is why coastal cultures instinctively link salt to storytelling. In Portugal, fishermen toss pinches into waves before storms, a ritual said to calm the sea's temper by reminding it of shared history. The Maori described te ohio, the endless circling of tides, as the ocean's way of redistributing memory, each wave carrying fragments of stories back to shore. When we say someone's worth their salt, we're unknowingly invoking this deep time ledger. The phrase originates from Roman soldiers paid in salarium, their wages literally measured in portions of preserved existence. So the next time you taste salt, whether on your lips after a swim or sprinkled over a meal, consider what else you're ingesting. Those crystals are more than flavor. They're condensed time harvested from an ocean that refuses to forget. Every grain is a fossilized moment, a mineral whisper from the deep saying, "I remember." And so will you. The ocean floor isn't just littered with wreckage, it's paved with entire civilizations. Plato's Atlantis may be the most famous, but it's far from alone. Off the coast of Gujarat, the ancient city of Dwarka sleeps beneath the waves, its submerged walls still visible during low tide like the ribs of a drowned giant. Hindu texts describe it sinking in vivid detail, how the sea rose in fury after Lord Krishna's departure, swallowing palaces of crystal and gold. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as allegory until marine archaeologists discovered a sprawling complex matching the descriptions, complete with stone anchors and pottery dating back 3,500 years. The city wasn't myth, it was memory preserved in brine instead of ink. What's chilling is how often these stories share eerie specifics. The Mayan Popol Vuh speaks of a great flood that cleansed the world of arrogance, leaving only ruins beneath the waters of Lake Atitlan. In 2020, sonar scans revealed a ceremonial platform submerged there, its carvings depicting the very flood described in the text. Similarly, the Yonaguni Monument off Japan's coast, a massive, terraced structure some claim is man-made, lies exactly where local legends place a sunken kingdom swallowed by a dragon quake. Coincidence becomes harder to swallow when so many cultures point to the same truth. The ocean doesn't just erase, it archives. Modern underwater archaeology races against time to decode these liquid libraries. The ruins of Heraklion, Egypt's legendary port city, emerged from the Mediterranean's murk in 2001, its colossal statues and hieroglyphic steles remarkably intact. Saltwater had preserved what centuries of shifting sands might have ground to dust. Yet here's the paradox, the same waters that guard these sites also corrode them. Steel dissolves, wood rots, and even stone crumbles under the relentless press of currents. Teams now use 3D photogrammetry to freeze fragile ruins in digital amber before they vanish, a technological twist on the ancient urge to preserve what the sea threatens to reclaim. This duality, the ocean as both curator and destroyer, fuels a provocative debate. Are these submerged cities lost or hidden? The Beihilyang Underwater Museum in China suggests the latter. Built around a 1,200-year-old stone hydrologic marker, the site reveals carvings of fish that only emerge when river levels drop, a coded drought warning meant for future generations. The ancients didn't just anticipate flooding, they engineered their knowledge to survive it. Similarly, the Baltic Sea's Stonehenge, a circular arrangement of boulders with artifacts dating back 11,000 years, sits precisely where glacial meltwater would have submerged it as seas rose. Too deliberate to be accidental, perhaps the most haunting clue lies in the architecture itself. From Cuba's alleged underwater pyramids to Indonesia's Gunung Padang, a stepped megalith possibly older than recorded history, these structures share a peculiar trait: they're built to endure cataclysm. Their massive stones fit without mortar, allowing them to shift without collapsing under seismic stress. Their alignments often track solstices or star patterns, as if meant to communicate across millennia. The ocean didn't claim these places by chance. They were designed to outlast the flood, to wait in the darkness until someone or something could read their message. So when divers brush silt from a sunken wall, or robots probe the depths of the Black Sea's astonishingly preserved ship graveyards, they're not just uncovering the past. They're stepping into an ongoing conversation between land and sea, one where the water isn't merely a grave, it's a scribe recording our rise and fall in layers of sediment and salt. The real question isn't whether Atlantis existed, it's how many more Atlantises are waiting down there, their stories pressed between the tides like flowers in a book, fragile, fading, but not yet forgotten. Water wears its history in hues as vivid as any tapestry. The Ganges doesn't merely flow, it carries the ochre stain of Himalayan clay, a chromatic diary of its journey from glacier to plain. To Hindu devotees, this turbid gold isn't murkiness. It's the river's living skin, proof of its sacred burden as it gathers ashes, flowers, and centuries of whispered prayers. Meanwhile, the Caribbean's crystalline blues, so piercing they seem to vibrate, hold a different kind of memory. Slave ships once crossed these waters, yet the sea absorbed none of their darkness. Instead, it refracts sunlight into a spectrum so pure it feels like defiance, as if the ocean chose to remember only the resilience of those who survived its depths. These colors aren't passive. They are active participants in cultural storytelling. In Japan, the indigo of Izome dye, fermented in vats for months, was believed to trap protective spirits within its fibers. Samurai wore it as armor against unseen harm, the deep blue serving as a liquid ward frozen into cloth. Similarly, the turquoise waters of Mexico's cenotes were considered portals to the underworld, not just for their depth, but for their unearthly glow, a hue so alien it seemed to belong to another time. The Maya painted their dead with this same pigment, ensuring the shades would guide them through the afterlife's watery corridors. Science offers a startling parallel in the phenomenon of synesthesia, where senses intertwine like tributaries merging. For some synesthetes, the sound of rushing water might evoke a swirl of cobalt, or the taste of salt conjures a flash of seafoam green. These crossed wires mirror how cultures assign meaning to water's palette, not as arbitrary associations, but as visceral, embodied knowledge. When an Inuit elder describes ice as singing white, or a Bengali poet calls monsoon clouds the gray of forgotten promises, they're articulating a truth neuroscience now recognizes. Color and memory share neural real estate, their pathways tangled like mangrove roots. Yet pollution unravels these chromatic narratives. The once jade waters of Vietnam's Ha Long Bay now fade under algal blooms fed by runoff, their emerald brilliance dulled to a sickly khaki. In Venice, the Grand Canal's famous shimmer, a mosaic of lapis and gold reflections, increasingly battles streaks of fluorescent orange from industrial waste. These shifts aren't just aesthetic losses, they're erasures of cultural memory. The Maori measure water health through Wai Maori, a concept linking clarity to ancestral integrity. When sediment clouds their streams, it's not merely an ecological crisis, it's a fading of the stories those waters once held. Perhaps this explains why efforts to restore waterways so often begin with color. Seoul's Cheonggyecheon River, once a concrete-covered sewer, now glows at night with LED installations mimicking its historic blues and artificial memory serving as both apology and pledge. In Bali, Sabak farmers still dye their irrigation canals with crushed jasmine petals, creating fragrant purple veins across the landscape. These acts aren't just rehabilitation. Their reanimation attempts to coax the water's palette back into conversation with those who depend on its hues for meaning. Because when a river loses its color, it doesn't just forget itself. It forgets us. Sailors didn't just cross oceans, they wore them. The walls of a rope tattoo around the wrist, the swallow mid-flight on the collarbone, even the ominous hold fast knuckled across fingers, these weren't decorations. They were liquid stories pressed into skin, a sailor's logbook written in ink instead of words. Maritime tattoos functioned as ritualized maps, anchors marked Atlantic crossings, turtles symbolized equatorial passages, and a fully rigged ship signaled rounding Cape Horn. Each design carried the weight of a rite of passage, a visual covenant between the sailor and the sea. But here's what's often overlooked: the very act of tattooing mirrors the ocean's own alchemy. Ink, a fluid, becomes permanent under the needle's dance, just as the sea's restless waves carve canyons into bedrock over millennia. Both processes transform the transient into the eternal, turning movement into memory. Consider the Polynesian tatau, where chiseled tools tapped ink beneath the skin to the rhythm of waves. The artist's mallet wasn't just a tool, it was a tide, each strike carrying the cadence of the ocean itself. In Samoa, the pear, a dense geometric tattoo covering a man's torso, was traditionally applied with seawater rinses between sessions. The salt wasn't merely antiseptic, it was sacramental, binding the design to the body with the same force that binds the ocean to the moon. Similarly, Japanese Ayazumi masters used water to mix their sumi ink, believing the liquid's purity affected the tattoo's longevity. The message was clear: water didn't just facilitate the ritual, it sanctified it. Modern tattoo aftercare reveals a paradox. Fresh ink must avoid water like a curse: no swimming, no soaking, no long showers. The sea, once a collaborator in tattooing's magic, becomes a threat to its preservation. Dermatologists explain this scientifically. Waterlogged skin slows healing, and bacteria in seawater invite infection. But folklore whispers a different warning. Old sailors claimed submerging a new tattoo too soon would wash the luck out, as if the design's power hadn't yet set like dye in fabric. There's an eerie symmetry here. Just as myths solidify from fluid tales into fixed legends, a tattoo transitions from vulnerable wet ink to resilient body art. The taboo isn't just medical, it's mythological, a liminal period where the story is still deciding whether to stay. The deepest connection lies in ink's composition. Traditional tattoo pigments often contained carbon or iron oxide, elements forged in stellar explosions and carried to Earth by cosmic winds. These same elements swirl in ocean depths: iron from hydrothermal vents, carbon from ancient marine life. When a sailor's skin absorbs ink, they're not just marking their body. They're binding themselves to the same elemental cycles that shape the tides. A compass rose on a forearm isn't just a navigational aid, it's a star map written in ocean-borne minerals. a reminder that every voyage, whether on skin or sea, is part of a grander current. So the next time you see a faded anchor on an old fisherman's arm, look closer. That ink isn't just a relic, it's a living ritual, a tide frozen mid-swell. And the water it once avoided, that's the punchline. The sea always wins. Salt and time will eventually blur the sharpest lines, just as waves smooth the jaggedest stones. The tattoo's permanence was never the point. Its dialogue with the water was. Drought doesn't just parch the land, it rewrites the soul of a place. The pueblones tell of the Bone Mother, a skeletal figure who emerges when the rains fail, her hollow eyes scanning the horizon for the faintest hint of moisture. She isn't just a specter of famine, she's the embodiment of collective memory in crisis. When she walks, she drags the weight of every dry season before her, whispering the names of forgotten springs and the rituals once used to call them back. Her presence is a warning. Scarcity doesn't just test survival, it sharpens remembrance. Modern droughts carry the same eerie resonance. Cape Town's Day Zero in 2018 wasn't just a water shortage, it was a cultural reckoning. As reservoirs dipped below 15%, the city didn't just ration water, it resurrected ancestral practices. Rain dances once dismissed as folklore were revisited. Elders taught children how to read the cracks in riverbeds like divination texts. The crisis forced a collision between technology and tradition, revealing how quickly modern infrastructure crumbles when the myths underpinning it fade. The most haunting lesson, those who remembered the old ways, how to harvest dew, how to bury clay pots to cool water, fared better than those who dismissed them as superstition. Apocalyptic fiction thrives on this tension. From Mad Max's gasoline wastelands to Dune's desert mystics, these stories share a chilling truth. Drought doesn't just destroy, it distills. In The Road, Cormac McCarthy's parched landscapes strip humanity down to its barest instincts, where a single sip of water becomes a sacrament. These narratives aren't fantasies, they're extrapolations. The Aral Sea, once the fourth largest lake on Earth, is now a salt-crusted graveyard of shipwrecks, a real-life wasteland where fishermen's nets hang useless in the dust. Its demise wasn't just an ecological disaster, it was the erasure of an entire way of life, a cautionary tale written in vanishing water. The irony is cruel. Water scarcity makes us remember what abundance allowed us to forget. Australian Aboriginal communities have long practiced fire stick farming, controlled burns that encourage biodiversity and prevent catastrophic wildfires. Now, as mega-droughts grip continents, Western scientists are scrambling to learn what these traditions knew all along, that land and water share a memory, and disrupting one fractures the other. The Navajo word for drought, toe-body, doesn't just mean no water, it translates to water has withdrawn, as if the element itself is a conscious entity, retreating from those who have broken covenant. Here lies the danger. When we dismiss drought myths as primitive allegories, we sever ourselves from the very lessons that could save us. The Bone Mother isn't just a pew-blown ghost, she's a prophet. Her skeletal fingers point to the cracks in our own systems, the places where we've traded reverence for recklessness. The next time the rains fail, we'll have a choice: relearn the rituals buried in the dust or join the relics we've forgotten. The water remembers. The question is, will we? We've followed the ocean's whispers through 26 rituals, each a ripple in the vast, liquid memory of our planet. From the Polynesian navigators' chants to the storm-calming drums of the Arctic, from the sacred wells of Ireland to the pearl divers' whispered prayers, we've traced humanity's deepest fears and brightest hopes across the surface of the water. But here's the revelation: the ocean's memory isn't just folklore or physics, it's us. Every drop holds the weight of our stories, our offerings, our grief. When we pour libations or skip stones, we're not just performing rituals, we're adding to the water's endless, echoing conversation. Think of your local river, the pond in your neighborhood, even the rain puddles on your street. These aren't just bodies of water, they're living archives. The Cherokee believe every stream carries the voices of those who have knelt at its banks. In Bali, villagers place tiny palm leaf boats in the currents, each one carrying a written prayer. Even the simple act of tossing a coin into a fountain ties you to an unbroken chain of longing that stretches back to Babylon. Water doesn't distinguish between sacred and mundane. A tear shed into the sea holds as much weight as a Viking's gold. This is why the Maori say, "Ti mona nui a kiwa, he roimata yua o ngatupuna." The ocean is not water, but the tears of ancestors. Every wave that crashes ashore is a reminder not of separation, but of continuity. The same currents that carried Phoenician ships now carry container vessels. The same tides that lifted Viking longships still rock fishing boats today. The water remembers them all, so here's my challenge to you. Listen, next time you stand by any water, a lake, a bathtub, even a glass on your nightstand, pause. What does it hold? Maybe your grandparents' laughter as they swam in a now dry creek. Maybe the unspoken wishes of strangers who have passed that same spot for centuries. Water isn't just a resource, it's the world's oldest storyteller, and it's still speaking. Now I want to hear from you. What water rituals live in your family? A grandmother's tea reading, a childhood game of skipping stones. Drop your stories below. Let's weave them into the ocean's next chapter, because the myth isn't over. It's rising with the tide.